I hope you're doing well. Today we're gonna create this September bullet journal theme together, and I'm so excited to share my first official fall theme of the year. We have some pumpkins, warm fall colors, cozy coffee shop vibes, and without further introductions, let's get started with the cover page. We're gonna start with the biggest painting in this video, which is gonna take some time, so if this doesn't interest you much, feel free to skip ahead of it. We're gonna create this watercolor coffee shop scenery, and I know it looks a bit complicated. This is a more advanced painting for sure, but I'll show you all the steps on the way to hopefully give you a better idea of how to create a bigger painting like this. First of all, we need a little bit better quality paper for this painting, so I switched to my B5 size watercolor sketchbook, and I'm gonna later scan this painting on my computer and print it in a smaller size to fit the bullet journal. This is not necessary, however, so you could definitely create the picture in the correct size. I just think that it's easier to paint a slightly larger version, especially for something like this with a lot of small details. Well, anyway, I think the most important step in this painting is the line work part, because we definitely need a good guide to all these details. I decided to use this warm brown colored pencil for the initial sketch because I thought this would blend in with the colors a little bit better than a regular pencil. I will also speed up this initial sketching step because after this sketch we are gonna draw all the main lines again with a black pen, which is much easier to see in the video. I also got a comment from someone asking if I could show just a full sketch so you could pause the video and copy it for yourself, and I've never thought about doing that, so thank you so much for that comment. I completely understand how that could be helpful, and I'll try to include a shot like that from now on. But after the sketch was done, I took out the black pens and started the main line work stage. I know this is probably not the most interesting part of a painting to watch, but it is important, so I don't want to completely skip it. I was mainly using this 005 Pigma Micron, which is quite thin. I didn't want the lines to draw too much attention, so I was trying to be pretty careful here, just going over the main shapes, and I especially tried to keep the line work minimal and unnoticeable in the areas where I intended to do some highlights or just lighter colors in general. I've seen this technique referred to as the line and wash technique, where you first add the main line work and then add watercolors afterwards. If you use more pigmented paints like gouache, the outlines will likely get covered, but I've personally never had problems with regular watercolors. But when the main lines are finally done, it's time to take out the watercolors and start with the first background washes. We're also definitely going to intensify some of the line work later when we get a better idea of the colors and where more intensity is required. So even if you leave things a little unfinished, it's completely okay. But now, when it comes to the colors, there are a few tones I used throughout this whole image, and I'd say that the main ones were burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and ivory black. I wanted the overall tone of this picture to be quite warm, very brown but neutral at the same time. So these first layers are barely visible. They're basically the color of the most highlighted areas in the picture. So the way we work with watercolors is by starting from the light tones and then gradually intensifying things and creating shadows. So it's important to have an idea of all the highlighted areas so that you don't accidentally go over something with a dark color that was supposed to stay light. We can of course add small white highlights at the end, but making any bigger area lighter afterwards doesn't really work with watercolors. Then after the first light colors, which basically just added a tiny bit of warmth to the building, I started to work on this left side here because I felt like this was kind of separate from the rest of the image and I just wanted to get it out of the way. It was also a good opportunity to have a feel for the colors without committing to any important part. So something I tried to focus on in this painting was leaving texture and details. You can see this especially with some of the shadow parts. So instead of just creating a smooth wash, I kind of tried to add these broken shadows that would be created by the leaves hanging over the building or over this street. I also tried to consider how the shadows fall on this building. So for example, all the details like the lamps and the sunshade thingy, which is apparently called an awning. I've never heard that word in my life, so I hope I'm using it correctly. Anyway, all those elements create shadows here, and in general, the right side of the painting will be much darker than the left side. I always struggle a little bit trying to explain a long painting process in a concise way because pretty much all I did was just work slowly on building the colors in different parts of this painting. I always see the first color layers as background layers, and later when we've added more color all over the painting, I go back to add further details, shadows, intensity, and so on. I also like to lay down any really dark areas as fast as possible. So here it would be these windows that I wanted to paint mostly black to add some contrast. After you have a dark color like this on the page, I think it helps to find the required intensity for the rest of the painting. And I also left these light reflections to the windows. I know they're not super realistic or anything, but I thought it was another way to add some color variation and make this whole scene just a tiny bit more interesting. I was thinking about painting some coffee shop interior to the windows, so instead of just having the windows dark, we could actually see inside the coffee shop, but I thought that would be a little bit too much trouble, and I thought this painting really needed some of these darker black areas, so I decided to leave that out, but if you'd like to challenge yourself, I think that could look really cool. Something I also struggled with a little bit was finding a balance between keeping everything in this warm brown tone and still differentiating each element from the other. So I tried to use a little bit cooler gray tones in the shadow areas to add this slight blue undertone there, and then obviously the leaves will have a brighter orange and yellow tones. I also thought that adding just the smallest green accent, which was the plants in the bottom right corner, added a bit of color contrast here and somehow broke the orange brownness. I didn't really think about that while painting, so it was just a happy accident I noticed later. But then the rest of the painting process is pretty much the same, so just gradually working on these areas, adding details, more shadows, colors, and just trying to be careful to not do anything that can't be undone. I also took out the same black pen at some point, and this was very useful to clean up the picture. I use it especially on the windows to hide any small white spots between different sections and straighten any lines and edges. It also helped to add a bit more definition to some of these smaller details. Then at the very end, I also used a bit of white gouache paint with a teeny tiny brush and just added this here and there. I tried not to go overboard with the white details this time, but a few highlights always make things better. But this was all I did to this painting by hand, and now we're moving to the computer where I scanned this picture and did any final edits. If you've ever scanned a painting to a computer, the first thing you might notice is that all the colors are completely off, so that's always the first thing I edit. I needed to modify the contrast, the hue, add back some shadows, and this time I especially needed to adjust the orange tones because they came out much more red than yellow. And after that I just went over the whole image, removed any dust or sketch lines, and made some small modification to the areas I wasn't happy with. I use digital brushes that imitate painted texture pretty well, so at least I think my modifications are pretty unnoticeable even though I make them afterwards. And I also try not to fix everything because some imperfections are part of anything hand painted. But you will see that I definitely straightened some of these windows and just cleaned up some areas like the rail in the balcony. And I also added some sunlight effect, which is very difficult to add with regular watercolor. So that's just something I often do afterwards in my paintings when I edit them digitally. The reason I used so much time and effort on this painting is that it will be part of the new fall collection in my shop, which should launch in a week or so. I still don't have an exact date because I haven't received all the products I've ordered from my manufacturer, but I'll keep you updated on my Instagram and on my shop's newsletter, which is the place you'll hear about any new launches first. I also give a small special discount for the people on the newsletter and on my Patreon, so if you're interested in that, you can join the newsletter at the bottom of my shop website. But that's all for the shameless promotion this time, and now let's get back to the bullet journal. So this whole painting and editing process took me maybe around 6 or 7 hours in real time. So I hope you understand how I can't really show the entire process, but I still hope that you found this part interesting or helpful. Well, anyway, here is the final printed image next to the original one, and I must say that I am all in all quite happy how this turned out. And I really enjoyed the painting process as well. But now, before moving on, we still have this other calendar side page to decorate, and I decided to go for some scrapbooking style decorations this month to save a little bit of time that the bigger painting took. These paper patterns will also be included in my new fall collection, and then since I don't have most of my own stickers yet, I decided to use these beautiful fall stickers from Heda's shop, Ikikai Papir. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Mochi Pujo here on YouTube, and you should definitely go check out her shop if you haven't already. I also took out some random washi tapes and other stickers. I didn't end up using all of these, but I always like to have these options around me when I decorate. So I layered some of these papers in the background and then cut this big box from a creamy ivory tone paper that we're gonna use to write out the monthly calendar. September is one of those months where you need 6 rows because the month starts on a Sunday and ends on a Monday, but I decided to use the unnecessary spaces for some decorations and for writing the September title. My favorite thing on this page is definitely this girl sticker that I think perfectly matched the colors and the coffee shop vibes, and I tried to place her as close to the edge as I dared to not cover too many days. In the end, I really like how this spread turned out. This might be my favorite cover spread of the year, but now let's move on to the monthly planning. We're starting here by creating a Dutch door layout where the first spread will be for the monthly plan and the second one for a short monthly reflection. We're adding some papers on this spread too, so I started with this text scribble paper here on the right side, and then I added this slightly weird shaped craft paper bubble to the left page. I was planning to paint a coffee cup to the bottom of the page and make it look like this craft paper came out of it like steam or something. It made more sense in my head at the time, but anyway, we're kind of jumping all over this spread. So next, I wanted to get this title area out of the way. I used the same dark brown paper to write the title on and added a few decorations under it. And then I'll use this craft paper box to write about what I want to focus on in September, which is something I like to do at the start of each month. I've been doing it for such a long time already that I don't really know if it actually helps, but it always feels like a very grounding and intentional moment, and I do think that it clears out the monthly plan for me, so maybe it means it helps. After that, I jumped to this half page, and I'll use this one as a habit and sleep tracker combination. These are basically what I had separately in my previous monthly theme, and I actually really enjoyed using them, especially the sleep tracker, I'd say. It also made me realize how little I actually sleep, so I hope that continuing to track my sleeping habits will encourage me to pay more attention to it. Then I just doodled these small icons for my trackers. I only track my reading, exercising, and the days I complete my to-do list, which is not ideal, because sometimes the to-do list changes a bit and I don't necessarily end up doing everything, but I still had a productive day, so I never know if I should still fill the tracker or not. But I couldn't come up with anything else that I could showcase with a tiny icon, so we'll continue with this. But after adding these stickers and paper decorations, we can now go over this very simple, cozy coffee cup painting that I mentioned earlier. I sketched out the most basic coffee cup shape and then went over all the outlines with a black micron once again. After that, I took out the same watercolors and I started by painting the cup itself. I wanted this to be brown to add a little bit of contrast to the page, so I was basically just using burnt umber shade here. I haven't painted directly in my bullet journal in a while, and I actually think it might be the first time I painted in this one, at least with watercolors. And yeah, the blending experience is not the best. It was kind of difficult to keep the colors smooth, so this cup color ended up being a little bit splotchy, which is fine, it's not a big deal at all, and I could eventually smooth it out just a little bit by kind of adding a light layer of color on top. I also added some black to the paint and tried my best to create some subtle shadows here on the sides of the mug and on the lower part of the handle. I think the important point when painting on your bullet journal is to not use too much water, so working with a fairly dry brush with a lot of paint will give you a better experience. You also can't go over the same spots too many times because the paper starts to basically crumble apart, but working with a light hand will allow you some time to blend. I switched to a lighter and warmer color for the coffee part, and I tried to create this latte look by leaving some white swirls in there and adding some darker dots, and I think it worked. Definitely nothing special, but a fun, quick painting idea to add in many different themes. I thought that the page still looked a little bit empty, so I just threw in these 3 dots where I can list 3 of the most important tasks of September. I don't think I necessarily need this, but it was the perfect thing for this spot, so why not? And then let's flip to the second side and finish the reflection spread. Here I started from the left page and added these 2 craft paper boxes, but we're again adding some decorations by layering the papers and stickers. I ended up using almost all stickers from this Ikigai Papir full sheet, which I believe is from last year, by the way. I'm not sure if she has them available anymore, but if not, I believe there will be other beautiful fall stickers for this year. Anyway, my reflection questions are pretty much always the same, so I like to start with this on my mind section where I can write about whatever I've been thinking or feeling lately, and then I followed this with an I'm grateful for section, which is pretty self-explanatory as well. But then let's jump to the right side where I started by finally writing a bigger reflection title. I didn't really focus too much on the fonts and titles this time, so they are a little bit all over the place. But anyway, then I decided to make this quick doodle section. I drew a book, a yarn ball, and this wonky looking TV to list some of the things I'm currently doing, so what I'm reading, what I'm currently knitting, and what I've been watching recently. I think recording stuff like this is so fun to look back to, so I try to include sections like this whenever it fits my themes. Then I finished the reflection page with this simple ups and downs list that I can also fill at the end of the month. All in all, I really like how this section turned out as well. The papers and stickers just really add a cozy, colorful vibe here. And now let's turn to the last section of the September theme, which will be the weekly section. I'm not gonna lie, I've still really been enjoying my current weekly layout, so I'm gonna continue with something very similar. So we are once again starting by cutting these next 3 pages, which leaves us with exactly 4 weekly spreads in total. However, before setting up the actual weekly layout, I decided to set up this top corner first, where I glued in some papers and another girl sticker. These brown stripes will be for the weekly section titles because I thought it would be a fun way to really separate that section. And then I wanted to do this individual floating letter title for the week's word here. We'll balance out the top section with another small watercolor painting later, but first let's quickly go over the weekly layout that is very similar to what I had last month. So I've really been enjoying this vertical weekly layout where I have lots of space to write about my tasks throughout the day. I used some of my own weekly title and number stickers, which makes setting up these weekly sections very quick and easy for me. I do wish I could separate Saturday and Sunday on their own columns, but there just isn't enough room to do that, so to keep things even, I just combine them like this. Then I like to highlight our usual lunch and dinner times because it helps me to divide my daily tasks into morning, afternoon, and evening tasks, which just works for me really well. Last month, I also added these when I woke up and went to sleep sections, which were surprisingly fun for me to keep up with. And then after all this is done, I'll probably do something very similar for the other weeks, so I'll set up those later. And now all we have left is to paint this quick pumpkin and fall leaves painting in the top corner. I started this once again with this sketch and then went over all the lines with the same thin 005 micron that I've been using for all the line work. If you want a more pumpkin heavy fall theme, you could easily just draw similar style pumpkins all over the place, but just maybe alter the sizes and shapes a little bit. You could also change the colors slightly to have some lighter or darker pumpkins to add some variation. However, I kept it very simple with these two, so I just colored them with a light, pretty muted orange shade. And then just kind of went over the gap spaces with a darker shade. I think doing this creates just a bit of dimension to the shapes and makes it look like you spent some effort, though it requires very minimal extra work. I also added a darker, warm brown color to these leaves, finished everything with some quick dots here and there, and that finally finishes our September monthly theme. This must be one of my favorite themes of the year. I just love these scrapbook decorations and all these warm fall colors, and I can't wait for you guys to see all the new products that will launch in my shop in about a week. There are actually going to be 2 new collections, so I hope you're excited about that. But anyway, if this was your first time around here and you'd like to stay tuned for more, definitely consider subscribing. But I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!